Well, good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. Seems things are already heating up in advance of the session, which is on Monday. It starts next Monday if you're not following it too closely yet, but we will be following it very closely. And if you haven't listened to our the first half of our preview, you can check that out. We put it out yesterday. But today we are so thrilled to have Dr. John Fleming on, Louisiana State Treasurer. So pleased to have him back with us. Before we get into the conversation all about what's coming down the pike as well as his Senate race, let me read the scripture of the day. It is 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. And this is a familiar one. And I've even read it lately on the show, but I guess the Lord must really want me to get this one. So I'm going to do it again because that's where he sent me this morning, and there must be a lesson in there for me today. So here we go. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. Most of all, I'm writing to encourage you to pray with gratitude to God. Pray for all men with all forms of prayers and requests as you intercede with intense passion. And pray for every political leader and representative so that we would be able to live tranquil, undisturbed lives as we worship the awe inspiring God with pure hearts. It is pleasing to our Savior God to pray for them. He longs for everyone to embrace his life and return to the full knowledge of the truth. And it's critical that we pray for our political leaders. A couple things jump out at me. The fact that he talks about pray with intense passion. That's a great place to really hone our passion is in prayer. We get pretty passionate on this show, and that would be a great place to channel some of that energy. um, but both we pray, of course, for the political leaders who are walking with the Lord and fighting on our behalf. Those are the ones that are easy to pray for, right? And then there are the ones who seem to be way off course, and we've got to remember to pray for them too. Because as the passage says, the Lord longs for everyone to embrace life in him and return to the full knowledge of the truth. And I was also struck this morning by the phrase return to the full knowledge of the truth, because it implies that they once had knowledge of the truth and left it. At a minimum, I think it must refer to what Isaiah foretold, that after the Messiah came, people would have the truth written in our hearts. So let's use that as our prayer today, that all of our political leaders would return to the full knowledge of the truth, which is the truth that the Lord has written on their hearts.
Powerful, and it dovetails perfectly with something else that St. Paul said, which is that this is a spiritual battle
Yeah.
that we're in at bottom. It's not really a social battle fundamentally. It's not a political battle fundamentally. As Dr. Fleming well knows, it really is a spiritual battle. And we especially should be praying for those who appear to have gone off course. They're the ones who need the prayers the most, and so we have to be prayed up, and everything we do should be guided and directed by prayer. That is such a powerful reminder, Danielle, to all of us. Uh, and someone I know knows a lot about prayer and building his life on the foundation of Christ is Dr. John Fleming, the Louisiana treasurer, who's here with us, I think, today for the third time. Dr. Fleming is former U.S. congressman and founder of the Freedom Caucus in the Congress, also a former top aide of President Donald Trump. Great American. Dr. Fleming, thank you for joining us again on the State of Freedom today, sir.
Well, thanks, Chris and Danielle. And let me add, from the scripture there, it talks about truth. A phrase that's been recently inculcated into our discussion, and you hear often in the media, is my truth,
Yeah.
your truth. There is only one truth. There are facts, and sometimes you can have different opinions and draw different conclusions from them, but there's only one truth, and certainly the Bible teaches us what that truth is.
Yeah,
Yeah. So well said.
absolutely. Yeah, no question about it. Speaking of truth, Dr. Fleming, one of the things that we've been particularly impressed by recently that you were a part of is this transparency portal. that is up on the treasurer's website, and it really, I mean, it's designed to ensure that parents and citizens of Louisiana are able to see very specifically in detail how our educational institutions and governing authorities are spending taxpayer money.
Mhm.
You know, the contracts will be up there, and every dime that's being spent for whatever purpose in
Yes.
our schools will be right there. Tell us about that and why that is so important.
Well, this bill was passed. It was authored by Representative Rick Edmonds, who himself is a pastor, has pastored for many years. And it's really a companion bill to the subsequent school choice bill that was passed last year. And what I say is, what good is school choice if you can't decide, if you can't discern from one school or one school system and another?
Mm.
So I think it's a beautiful combination. And as you point out, this went live March 31st. We kicked it off in the media April 2nd. And what it does is it shows for all 120 public schools across the state and charter schools, um, everything about them that you could possibly want to know. Their budgets, their administrative costs, their administrative salaries, their teacher salaries, their contracts, who the contracts are with, how much the contracts are, school performance, uh, as I say, virtually anything. And the people who manage this website, the technical people, the company that we engage with on this, have other states with their transparency websites as well. But they tell us that this is the most comprehensive in the entire United States. No state has a comprehensive transparency website such as what we have now. And so we're very proud of this. And again, it's going to help, I think, parents make decisions because going forward, the government dollars are going to be following the student to the school rather than to the school directly. And this is a way of bringing the free market. You know, we talk about in a democracy a free market of ideas, a free market of consumer purchases. Well, this is bringing the free market to our school system, which is way overdue because as long as we're putting that money into the hands of government bureaucrats and and these school unions, they're going to play it to their advantage in some cases rather than that for the students. At least that's what's been proved out, which is precisely why, as you know, the president is taking down the federal Department of Education. But anyway, this gives you, the parent, the individual citizen, the ability to discern for yourself. And quite honestly, we came across some things that people are going to question. That I think because they felt no one was looking, they could do things, spend money on things that probably would not be considered by most people to be direct expenditures for education.
Well, that brings up a great point because we saw earlier this week that Dr. Cade Brumley and the Bessie Board were calling out New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell, as well as the school board there, but especially Mayor Cantrell for being MIA when it comes to the New Orleans school system's budget crisis.
Mhm.
It's facing a $50 million deficit, which in my opinion amounts to malfeasance in office for every single person who had rights to charge anything to that. They are not controlling their spending in any way, shape, or form. In your view, would this transparency measure have headed that off at the pass?
Very likely so. I don't know exactly the cause of their shortfall, but again, see, there's a requirement that 70% of your expenditures have to go for direct educational use. But when that money is spent on dinners at Galatoire's or Commanders, they're spent on sort of vacation expenses that are not necessary. I mean, you know, teachers can certainly get together, and sometimes they may want to go to meet at a hotel or something. But in going, let's say, to Hawaii and places like that, is that really necessary? And so I think very likely something like that, this disaster could have been headed off, because what you'll probably see is where that money was mismanaged. And really, it just takes daylight, which is the best disinfectant when it comes to transparency, where people call that into question and they hold their superintendents, their principals, and their school boards accountable for this overspending for what is really very wasteful things in most
Yeah.
cases.
Dr. Fleming, does the website, the transparency website, include curriculum? Does it include specific instructional materials in detail, or does it only document the cost generally for those instructional? Because I'm asking only because there are a number of parents who are very concerned, and this has been the subject of legislation as well, that the schools are not being fully transparent with them with respect to what they're actually teaching their kids in some of these schools with some of the critical race theory and DEI and all the rest of it. How much does the website go into actual curriculum?
Well, it's not intended to do that, because what it's looking at is the actual expenditure of dollars, where they're going. It's all about dollars and cents and budgets, and it does get into performance. So you can find out indirectly if the kids are, if they're not getting adequate training on math or English, things such as that. You can bet that probably they're being taught other things, but it doesn't get into course content specifically. Now, that's beyond the scope of the legislation, and we'd be happy to add that. But this is primarily a dollars and cents.
A fiscal accountability measure.
Absolutely. And we believe that this should be expanded. One area that we're looking at, and we hope to add to it, is to look at the annual appropriations coming out of the legislature.
Please.
There's a lot of money spent on NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and we see a lot of indirect evidence that money is going into pockets rather than into the services they advertise. And there really is no oversight on the beneficial impact of these NGOs and what they're really using the money for. And in the case of cities and parishes, sometimes they don't know or even indicate they need the money.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's kind of like build it and they will come. The legislator wants the money to flow to the city or parish that they represent, when they're not really asking for anything. So there's a lot we can do with transparency there as well.
I agree with you. And another area I'd love to see this is in DOTD.
Yes.
I live down here in Terrebonne. I live in a small community. We have a bridge, the Berg Bridge. It's been out for almost 4 years, disrupting an entire community that was completely decimated by Hurricane Ida. It's been an incredible, not just inconvenience, but it has really hurt small businesses in this
Yeah.
area. And we don't have any information on who the contractor is. Why is the contract taking so long? I mean, if we reach out to DOTD, to be fair, they have been honest with us. They have been, open with us.
Right.
But I want to see these contractors' ratings. I want to see how much of their money is going to overhead. Why are
Yes.
they so behind schedule? All this stuff should be very much public and easy to not only see, but to understand whenever you're looking at it.
Right. Yeah, you're so right about that, Danielle. And again, I think that if this gets disclosed to the public, there are going to be some pretty hard questions asked, and I think you'll begin to see movements. But again, going back to this transparency website for K through 12, I truly believe that teachers are underpaid, and I think that we'll find out the reason is that the money is going to contracts and overhead and to administrators.
Yeah.
That are oftentimes duplicated. Many of them are highly paid. I'm talking about, in the $200,000, $300,000 range, when our teachers, bless their heart, are still well under $100,000 a year in pay and haven't had raises in years. And that's direct classroom expenditures, and that's really where the money needs to go.
Yeah. Dr. Fleming, as you talk, I think about, Doge generally. And as we've discussed before, there has been a monumental effort on the federal level to expose this grift,
Mhm.
to expose this wasteful spending, and even criminal activity potentially on the part of public officials
Yes,
getting kickbacks with our money. I mean, they
yeah,
go into office, making a couple $100,000 a year, and by the time they leave office, they're multimillionaires. And Elon Musk has called that out in a number of things. And it seems like this transparency website is an effort to, as you said, just be transparent about how taxpayer money is being spent. And that leads me to this question. To what extent have you seen on the state level thus far a sincere Doge effort, a sincere effort to expose exactly what we're talking about here, the NGOs, the inefficient spending, the illicit spending of our tax dollars on the state level? I know they've talked about it a lot, and I know a Doge commission was set up, but have you seen meaningful steps to do what's necessary to truly trim our government and make it more accountable to the people fiscally?
Chris, unfortunately, apart from this transparency website, I've seen not even utterance from the so-called Doge um, group that was set up under executive order by the governor. It doesn't mean that they're not in place and doing things, but I specifically asked Governor Landry to include my office in this. I don't necessarily have to be in it myself, but a representative would be good. And we've not heard anything from anybody. And you see, as treasurer, I see where the dollars go. And I don't see how you can do Doge without involving the treasurer. In fact, Elon Musk, where was the first department he went to when he began?
The Treasury Department.
Treasury Department, yes. And so I'm just shrugging my shoulders, going, we want to hear from you. Let's hear from Doge. But so far, we have not heard, not the first word or involvement. I have spoken with Senator Cloud about our ideas on the appropriations, and she shows a lot of interest. But thus far, nothing more has happened with that. We've had difficulty in the year and a half that I've been in office with many of the senators and representatives being candid about what they're requesting in the appropriations process. Again, I think some of them, maybe a lot of them, view this as a quick and easy way to get reelected by making people back home. And they're not the only ones. When I was in Congress, remember when I came to Congress in 2009, we had earmarks. And word would go out, Fleming, what do you want? How much money do you want? And where does it need to go in your district and all of that? But we ended those in 2010, and they've brought them back to some extent, but not like they were before, where they were terribly wasteful with a bridge to nowhere and a military runway built in a city that has no military. Things like that, wasteful stuff like that, really are very bad for government. But I'm afraid that from our appropriations process, in my personal belief, there's quite a bit of waste. And I think it's particularly bad in the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations that are created to do things that government should do, such as taking care, let's say, food banks or diapers for children, things like that. But you see things that make you suspicious. The money's not really going to the end user. It's really going into salaries where people are working, or maybe they're not working. We don't have the visibility from the Department of Treasury to measure the impact. And that's the reason why we really need more help in this area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dr. Fleming, I never thought that I would actually be saying this when they first announced the establishment of the Doge Commission, but it looks like your office is actually the only entity in government at the moment that is actually making real efforts to be transparent with Louisiana citizens about how our money's being spent. And I just don't see how we can possibly uh, really return the government to the people and regain the trust of the people of Louisiana until we see meaningful action on Doge across the spectrum. And I'm really sad to hear that you have not been included in the process. I mean, it's like trying to ride a bicycle without a chain on it.
Yes.
It just seems like a massive oversight, if that's what it is, an oversight, not to include the man who writes the checks in the process. It just
Yeah.
seems really odd.
I agree, Chris. One thing, of course, that's always been a bee in my bonnet, which is one of the reasons why I was one of the 9 founders of the House Freedom Caucus in Congress when I was there, was even so-called conservative Republicans talk the talk. They have the rhetoric about cutting budgets and balancing budgets and cutting wasteful spending. But once you get them in a position to actually fire with live ammunition, many times they just drop the ball. I saw that in Washington. There was a lot of talk, a lot of rhetoric about doing what Elon Musk is doing today, but it just never happened. And I'm afraid that happens in Baton Rouge as well. I think it happens in a lot of state houses that there can be quite a delta between the rhetoric and the action taken. So I do think that, going back to really what's in my heart about all of this is I think we should zero out, we should end personal income tax and certainly have the lowest corporate income tax in the country. That way we will bring businesses, jobs, and people back to Louisiana. But we can't achieve that unless we end wasteful spending. So that's a reason why, in my opinion, if we're ever going to get there, and states around us are moving in that direction, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Texas, Tennessee, and Florida are already there. If we're going to compete to the new economy that's coming to the South today, where the center of economy in this country will be in the future, we have got to cut wasteful spending. We've got to get away from the Huey Long model of government. And there's a lot of talk in Baton Rouge, but I don't see much action quite yet.
Yeah, and you've talked about these non-governmental organizations, which are essentially nonprofits,
Yes.
quote unquote, but
All right.
they're called non-governmental organizations. Why are we giving them money as taxpayers? If I wanted to give them money as an individual citizen, I have every right to do so. If I want to support their work, let me give my own cash dollars directly to them. I don't need to pass it through Baton Rouge to give it to those organizations. Those organizations need to stand on their own 2 feet and not have the government be a pass through, because if they can't do that, then they have no business existing.
Well, I agree. I think that these nonprofits, and of course, we have to put quotation marks around nonprofit
Right.
because all you have to do is generate paychecks and distribute the cash that way, and it becomes a nonprofit because it's not in the business for profit. It's in the business for supposedly giving services to people, but then that requires a certain payroll. But that's often out of balance. There was one organization that recently they were allocated around $120,000 for their food bank, and they were going to have what they told us they needed was 20,000 for their payroll and the 100,000 for the food. Now they've come back and requested to us that they switch it around, 20,000 for the food and 100,000 for the payroll, which we declined, of course. But
At least
oftentimes,
they asked.
yeah, exactly. Oftentimes they don't ask. So that's where we see, at least in my personal view, where we see the most opportunity for abuse, waste, and grift is in the NGO appropriations. And again, one good start to that would be maybe the legislature should pass a bill that says that the money only goes to governmental organizations, not NGOs,
Yeah.
or to have a commission or some organization, maybe a third party organization like the Pelican Institute, to actually measure the impact of these NGOs. But to my knowledge, none of that infrastructure exists.
Yeah. And
Dr.
I
Fleming,
just
go
figured,
ahead.
sorry, Chris. I just found the chat here, and there's a question from the chat from someone named Lion Up that asks, can we get Secretary of State Landry's office spending so far from the Treasury point of view? They say that it's the most important state office right now.
So you're talking about Nancy Landry's office?
That's what they're asking. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you would have to go directly, I think, to Checkbook, which is the other kind of disclosure thing where you can
Okay.
find other departments, such as Treasury. I invite people to come to Checkbook and look at what we spend. In fact, we just presented our budget to the legislature just the past couple of weeks, and we're basically flatlining our budget. We're not asking for any significant increase at all because we feel like that we can manage what we have. We're certainly efficient, and for a lot of people don't know this. Our department, as well as others like the AG department, Mike Strain, we actually bring in more revenue through transactions than we actually spend. We give about half of what we take in to the general fund. So in certain ways, our department and others are actually profit centers for government. We carry our own cost and then give the excess back, for use by government. But there is a way to find that information. But my understanding is that would be in the so-called checkbook program, which I don't have a link for that for you
That's great.
today.
We'll figure it out, and we'll put a link in the show notes. Thank you.
Right.
Definitely. Dr. Fleming, so based on what you're saying, it's your position that while phasing out or ending the personal income tax in Louisiana is a critical objective, other states have already done it.
Yes.
It's not feasible until we begin to become more fiscally efficient in our government, before we begin to cut wasteful spending in all the areas that we've been talking about. Is that a fair assessment of your position?
I believe that's quite true. And remember the past bill from last year that cut taxes from 4.5% to 3% personal income tax. There was no cuts. What they did to pay for that cut to personal income tax and corporate income tax was to increase other taxes. They added and increased, for instance, sales taxes. So all they did was shift taxes from one group to another group.
Yeah,
And
three-card Monty.
right, and maybe that's a good first step, but I don't think that's the end of the game by any stretch of the imagination. And I will say you have to do it incrementally because what you want to achieve is a wider, broader tax base. So what you're doing is you're taxing more entities at a lower rate. That's how Texas is doing it. That's how the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act under Trump and the renewal of it this year works. When you get more business activity and more people coming to the state, you can lower those taxes. So we can do it over a period of 3 to 5 years if we do it correctly, but it's got to include streamlining our wasteful expenses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason why, Dr. Fleming, I was asking a question is that Representative Dixon McMakin, who is my rep here in Baton Rouge, has some proposed legislation that would phase out the state income tax by 2040, basically 0.2% every year. And while I certainly applaud in principle the idea of phasing out the state income tax, is there any reason why it should take 15 years to do it?
I don't believe so. Our budget last year was $51 billion. And that's the budget increase, let's say from the Jindal years, have increased twice the rate of inflation. So year 2040, I don't think that's fast enough and strong enough. I think it needs to be in a much shorter period of time. But it does require belt tightening, and that really has to be done. And the other problem we have is now the downrange effects of Medicaid expansion, where we're paying people not to work because they can get health care and many
Yeah.
other benefits for free. And I know in Washington, they're going to begin to work on that. And they're going to be asking able bodied, particularly men, to go back to work and get benefits through their employers rather than on Medicaid. See, Medicaid was a program created for young mothers and their children. It got expanded under Obamacare, which I very much opposed, so that really anybody who just simply is not working can be eligible for free health care. And that's just going to bust our country's budget and bankrupt us.
Yeah.
And it affects the state tremendously.
Yeah.
It does. You know, last time you were on, we explored this idea of fee for service government. And since Trump has been in office, we've seen his big moves with regard to, I think one of the things that may be an undercurrent is that he's looking at federal lands differently. And how can federal lands make money for the people? I happen to be of the belief that he may be moving us into a position where funds that are created on federal lands will replace our need for tax dollars and even tariffs. I think that that's ultimately where he's headed. Do you think that there is some space for that kind of thinking in the state of Louisiana? Do you think that there are people who are open-minded enough and big picture enough to be able to have a vision for that and make that a reality for us?
Oh, absolutely, Danielle. Look, the modern Democrat Party, the left, they want to make a wilderness out of all federal land. Under Obama, he, through executive order, created a bunch of monuments. Now, monuments, that sounds like a statue, right? A monument can actually be thousands and tens of thousands of acres of land set aside where it goes untouched. You can't do anything on it. You can't drill on it. You can't mine it. You can't rent it. You can't do anything that might generate revenue. And I just think that was a very bad idea. And I think Trump is thinking completely differently. He wants to make federal lands and offshore federal perimeters around the country, of course, productive and generate income. 50% of his plan to balance the budget, the federal budget, is through increased revenue, not just cutting expenses through Doge. And nobody knows how to do that better than he does. So I'm
You're
really
right.
optimistic that we're really going to begin utilizing vast federal lands. Just the other day, I went up to Vernon Parish and drove through Kisatchie National Park. And, it's a beautiful, pristine land with, a lot of timber. But just think about all the uses we could make out of that, and how that could be productive for the state and for the United States. And yet it sits there. You can't touch it. You can't do anything to it.
Yeah.
And why should Saudi Arabia and UAE and Qatar be the only countries in the world that have sovereign wealth funds that benefit the people? The wealth of the nation should benefit the people of the nation. We shouldn't be paying on top of that. We shouldn't be paying to use the gas and the oil, and then also not get any benefits out of the fact that it's being drilled in our own backyard.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we've been doing a lot of dumb things since World War II, which really touches upon the whole issue of tariffs. And that is that at the end of World War II, we were the only democracy, really Western power left standing. I mean, the Pacific was decimated, parts of China and Japan was decimated. Western Europe, most of Europe, all of Europe, really, if you include Russia, was just totally decimated. So we had the Marshall Plan to help these countries build up and hopefully become free nations, democracies, and so forth. Wildly successful. But part of that was to give them advantages in trade. And we still had the leverage because we could build the better products. We had the best industrial base, and we needed to give them some advantages for help. But by the 1980s, that was all gone. They had caught up. They were par to us. They were equivalent. Their manufacturing was as good as ours, and their labor was cheaper. And instead of rebalancing what Trump is doing today, in the 90s, we doubled down on it with NAFTA and other agreements, which completely decimated the middle of America, where we had all that manufacturing, and it all went south of the border. So really, we've been, as a nation, we've been shooting ourselves in the foot ever since World War II, and it's just time to turn this around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of turning things around, Dr. Fleming, I wanted to talk to you about the gold and silver legislation. Representative Cruz is bringing once again, brought it last year, and you testified very compellingly in committee in favor of the legislation, as well as others. The bill failed in committee, but still, Representative Cruz and you, I think, have also said that 9 out of 10 Louisiana citizens are in favor of making gold and silver transactional currency in Louisiana.
Right.
And as I said, the bill is being brought again. What is different in the bill, if anything, this year? And what is the likelihood of it getting through committee and getting passed?
Well, frankly, the reason why it died so quickly was the Louisiana Banking Association. Their lobbied heavily against it, and they felt like that it would lead to a state bank. And of course, we have no interest in creating a state bank. But let me bring you up to date with what's modern about gold and silver and the ownership of it, and how this could be very beneficial to us and would not hurt the banks at all. Today, you can own gold in a depository in a fractional way and carry a debit card and spend and buy gold with that, never even seeing the gold. It sits in a depository someplace. And you can see it if you want to. If you want to drive to the depository, which the closest one is actually in Texas, we could build one here in Louisiana if we wanted. That's been one of the big problems with gold is how do you store it? Do you put it under your bed? Do you bury it in the backyard? And then when you want to sell it for some reason, you got to go to a broker, which is going to cost you at least 10%. Well, now all of those transactional fees are under 1% if you buy it in a digital way, keeping it in a depository. Now, why would you want to have gold and silver? It's a great hedge against inflation because, as you know, a hard asset maintains its value even though the dollar drops in value continuously over time. That's why we have inflation. So it's a great way to have an investment that will be resilient against that. And a lot of times people just love owning gold. They love the idea to do that. But here are the two things that we need to look at as a state. Number one is it's quite possible that the appreciation in gold and silver, because we would declare it as a currency for the state of Louisiana, it may not be taxable. That appreciation may not be taxable. Now, we don't have a commitment from the IRS, a letter or anything that says that, but we could certainly make that argument and maybe win in court if there was a court battle. Number two is Glint, which is a company that really does this with the debit cards that I referred to. They've already agreed to give the state a certain percent of that transactional fee. So we could actually make money on this that would again go to help cut taxes because we can put it into the general fund. So there's a lot of good reasons why we could do this and make it a state recognized currency, which the US Constitution does allow for. And I think other states are going to do this. So I really hope that they reconsider it. But Cruz's bill, I think, is pretty much the same as it was before. And I think it would be very beneficial to the state. We can make this work if the legislature will pass it.
Yep, I agree with that. And I'm a big proponent of gold and silver, having both holding it actually, the physical asset yourself in case of some kind of terrible
hard
Yeah.
time, but then also in a way that allows you to have some flexibility in your own spending.
Right.
On the topic of digital assets, I haven't seen any legislation that would establish a strategic Bitcoin or crypto reserve yet in Louisiana. Is that something your office is working on with any legislator? I know a number of states have already started the wheels in motion on that. President Trump has already
Right.
established a working group to do the same at the federal level.
Right. There has been talk of that, and I've spoken to experts on this. One of my concerns is, do we have the adequate federal regulations in place, or will we have, to make sure that we don't invest our money in digital assets only to find someone like Bateman who stole billions of dollars. And so ultimately, we can't do it until the legislature passes it into law. So we're monitoring that. And if they do come forward with some bills, and they might in this legislation, I've not been informed of any in this session, but if they do, we'll be happy to work with them. Now, I will say parenthetically, we are the first state that's accepted crypto as payments for fees. The Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, we've already set that up. We have a vendor in place, and you can pay your license, for fishing and hunting, and we're happy to expand it to other things. But when we get it, it's going to be American dollars. It actually converts, within a matter of a second or two of that transaction into dollars. And so we receive it that way. So there's no risk on our part. But I'm happy to look at using digital currency as an investment modality. But we're going to have to look at that infrastructure. And personally, I think we need to wait a little bit and see how that works out in Washington, and follow their model, because the safety of that is going to depend largely on what they do in Washington on this.
Yeah. So much of what we're talking about here, Dr. Fleming, whether it's gold and silver as transactional currency, which is hugely popular in Louisiana, whether it's a meaningful Doge effort to weed out these NGOs and eliminate all this grift that we know exists. So much, it just all comes down to legislative and executive will. It comes down to whether or not our leadership has what it takes to do what's necessary to reform our state. So I just want to ask you straight out, and I know you don't have a crystal ball and you certainly can't see into the minds of our leaders, but do you think that our leadership in the state has the will and the desire to fundamentally reform our state in the areas that we're talking about, or are you skeptical about it?
Chris, we've got a super majority of Republicans. We have across the board Republican statewide elected officials, but I honestly don't think we're quite there yet. I have optimism and hope, but we're beginning now the debate on insurance and how do we get insurance rates down.
Yeah.
And I worry that some really good bills won't make it to the end, and that we won't get the kind of reforms we need that will stand up to, for instance, the trial lawyer lobby. The lobby industry is so powerful in Louisiana, and when I went to Congress in 2009, and Mark Meadows and Ron DeSantis and Jim Jordan and folks like that we all put this together, we took a lot of risk. We were willing to get pushed out of our seats, and many of us almost did, including me, when the legislature, led by John Boehner, the Speaker of the House Republican, tried to get me redistricted out of my district, but failed only because Jindal vetoed that bill. We were willing to take the risk that our political careers would end, and that we would sacrifice ourselves for the good of all. And I just don't think we're quite there yet, Chris, in Baton Rouge, quite frankly. I would like to see more willingness to take those kind of risks.
Yeah. You talk about the trial lawyers and the lobbyists having such power. And the truth is they only have as much power as we give them. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody has a voice in this state. If everyone got up, used their voice and told their legislator and told Governor Landry, frankly, and Secretary of State Landry and every other elected official, this is what we want, this is what
Right.
we expect, they would get that. But for
Yeah.
some reason, the trial lawyers seem to have the biggest impact, the biggest bang for their buck in terms of voice.
Yeah, they make a lot of money and they spend that money
Yeah.
to maintain their political control, and that's obvious to everyone. But we're coming to a point in time where it's just mission critical,
Yeah.
and I'm seeing a lot of rhetoric coming out of the legislature that they are ready for
Yeah.
real reform. But remember, like I said, I've seen this many times among Republicans. They talk the talk, but do they walk the walk? And so I'm really a little skeptical right now whether they actually come through. If they do, then I'm going to be the first one to stand up and applaud them. But I worry that there, that there may be some showboat bills and actions to make people look like they're being courageous, but yet they die quickly, and therefore they get the benefit, the appearance of doing good things without actually accomplishing that. Or we may get some bills that really sound good but really do very little. I worry about that. So that's why I want everyone to be very engaged with this and really put the pressure on their representative, their senator, to do the right thing in this and truly reform our insurance system. I heard part of the speech from the governor just the other day, and he said something that really is quite obvious is the problem, and that is that we have twice as many frivolous lawsuits as any other state. And that's what's driving the cost up. Nobody wants to withhold compensation to people who are truly injured. But when you have loosey goosey laws that allow people to collect money for fake injuries or staged injuries, and that's not wiped out through the course of medical evaluations and cross examinations and collateral sourcing and all this kind of stuff. If you don't have those in place, we're just going to continue to have wasteful high insurance rates. And so I think this is going to be a critical test for our governor and our legislature. Can they get meaningful reform through in this session that begins next week?
Yeah.
Well, Chris and I are 100% in agreement with what you just said, because we lived through the special session on crime where we felt they did exactly what you just described. They talked a good talk. They were so tough on crime. And then the bills in the end are not going to bring meaningful criminal justice reform. If anything, it may be creating more hardened criminals and just extending the misery of their time in prison. Which I just find to be absolutely inhumane and inappropriate for anyone who wants to take a real crack at meaningful reform.
Right.
What would you talk a little bit about, if you know yet, what bills may be on your agenda, what you're hoping to see? I know you talked about true insurance reform, and Chris and I previewed the collateral. Chris, what's it called again?
The collateral source legislation.
Yeah, collateral source legislation and a number of others, some of which, like you said, will do very little but make a good show. They're very splashy, good material for press releases, but at the end of the day, are not going to move the needle for the insured.
Right. Well, I don't have at hand the bill numbers exactly, but their titles make a lot of sense. Again, bringing back collateral source, which means that you can't the so-called victim or the injured person, the party, can't double, triple, quadruple dip into getting multiples of what their so-called cost of their injury is in the first place. Most states have this, maybe all of them, but Louisiana do, but yet we don't. But ways of doing away with the frivolous lawsuits. There are all kind of bills like that again have great names, but because it doesn't directly affect our office treasury, I've not done a lot of
Yeah.
research.
Sure.
But one of the things, but the collateral source is a critical issue.
Right.
And as you said, Dr. Fleming, it basically says when you get to trial, let's say the original billed amount for a medical bill, just to use a round figure, was $100,000, but the injured party's health insurance company paid 80% of that. And so the only amount that's actually owed is $20,000,
Right.
where a jury is looking at a verdict form they think that we're going to go ahead and award the $100,000 because that's what the plaintiff owes in medicals.
Right.
When in reality, the plaintiff owes $20,000. Under the current rule, the jury is not allowed to know that.
Right.
They're not allowed to know that the plaintiff does not actually owe the 100,000. And this legislation being brought by Representative Glorioso would allow that kind of transparency to a jury, so they would know specifically what they're awarding. There was a similar bill last year that was vetoed by Governor Landry. It did get through the legislature and was vetoed by Governor Landry. Do you anticipate, assuming that this bill gets through the legislature and gets to his desk, the same fate?
Well, he addressed that in his speech. And what he said was that he vetoed it last year because he didn't think it was a good bill. But he likes the version they have in Texas. And he said he has sent one that is the Texas version, and wasn't specific about what was different, that he would sign it. So I like hearing that, but does it have loopholes? Is
Right.
it really an effective bill on collateral source? I really don't know.
Yeah.
And I know Texas, I'm pretty sure, put a cap on injuries or for automobile accidents and stuff like that. I believe Governor Abbott did that.
Well, let me say this about caps and just all of these kind of reforms. This was done in the 1970s in Louisiana on medical malpractice. And obviously, as a physician, I've followed that for years. And you know what? It works beautifully in Louisiana. There are caps on damages, and yet people are compensated well for their loss. The whole system of medical malpractice is very balanced. It does protect the rights of the injured, but it also protects the rights of the providers. And so we're 50 years into this Louisiana Compensation Fund. And I can tell you, the medical malpractice insurance rates for doctors in Louisiana are among the lowest in the country. And nobody is unhappy with that. It was some tough reforms, back in the 70s. I mean, they had to fight the lawyers and all of that. But once it was put in, nobody's unhappy with it. So it worked well for medical malpractice. Why can't we apply this to automobile casualty and things of that sort? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, the only issue that I have personally with the statutory caps on injury claims is that the legislature is arguably not in a position to be able to determine what is an appropriate amount of compensation in every case. If a person gets into an accident and has to have both legs amputated and is brain dead for the rest of their lives, which happens, it seems like the jury. I mean, Thomas Jefferson said that trial by jury is the last anchor and hope by which a government can be held accountable to the principles of its constitution. And I believe in that very, very deeply. And so as much as I think some of these verdicts are outrageous,
Right.
first of all, there are mechanisms in place where a trial judge can reduce verdicts. And then you've got, of course, the appeal process. So there are some built-in mechanisms in place. And I just think we would have to think very deeply and carefully about whether or not we want to give the legislature the sort of blanket authority to determine what is an appropriate amount of compensation in every case.
Sure.
And so Dr. Fleming, I think that that's an issue. One of the few items in the insurance reform package that I'm hesitant about and hesitant to endorse for that reason, despite the fact that I know there's a lot of abuse. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't disagree with that. I mean, it has to be adequate. You don't want the law to limit full support for someone who may be disabled for life. And so, it's hard to say at this moment what would be the appropriate caps. But it's not just the caps that have made the Louisiana Patients Compensation Fund successful. It's all of the mechanisms in there, the checks and balances that we don't have in the current general insurance arena that we're talking about today. So even if we didn't, let's say we had fewer caps, or let's say no caps in medical malpractice, I believe we would still be in very good shape as a state. The whole reason why this was pushed hard was not to so-called protect doctors. It was to avoid having a doctor shortage, which, as you may recall, this happened in North Carolina back several decades ago in obstetrics. It got to the point where there were no obstetricians to speak of in North Carolina, and women had trouble finding doctors to deliver their babies because the medical malpractice had just gone crazy. And then they brought in reforms. There was unproven science they were using. They were saying that certain things that happened was the cause of cerebral palsy, which later got debunked, and that got it back into balance. But the point is, we need some control mechanisms where these things don't get out of control, and it becomes really a kind of a parlor game where if you hit the jackpot, you're going
Yeah,
to
that's
be a
very true.
millionaire for life.
Yeah. And Dr. Fleming, so much of this is a cultural issue. It is one of the founding fathers said that, our Constitution and our government are meant to serve a religious and a moral and ethical people. And really, ultimately, it can serve no other. No matter how many laws you have in place, if your culture is eroded, uh, to the point where lawyers will take cases that where there's
Mhm.
no injury and
Right.
minimal, if any, property damage, and work those cases up through a compromised doctor
Right.
into a $500,000 injury case. That's a cultural issue, and I'm not sure what laws we could put in place that would prevent that from happening. I mean, if you have a doctor who's willing to say, this person, I'll give you a good example. And I said this on the show the other day with Commissioner Temple. About a little over a year ago, my son tapped the rear end of a vehicle at a red light. There was no damage to the
Right.
other vehicle, zero, and no injury to the other party.
Yeah.
We wait a year, we give them the insurance information, we think everything's resolved, and 2 days before the statute of limitation runs, we get served with a lawsuit
Right.
alleging personal injury, bodily injury, property damage, and all the rest of it. And
Right.
our insurance company ends up settling the case for policy limits.
Right.
And I mean, how do you stop that type? And that occurs across the state in
Yeah.
Louisiana every single day. It's not just us.
Well,
And you
yeah.
know,
Well, I'll just tell you a personal story on that. When I started my practice in 1982 in Minden, Louisiana, I was a young, new doctor in town and building a practice. And two attorneys came to visit me. One of them was actually in the state legislature at the time. And they asked me to review cases for litigation. And I said, fine, I'm happy to do it. But I got a wink and a nod that told me that what they really wanted was to pay me nicely to give them the kind of findings, whether they existed or not, that they wanted to see for court. And of course, I said to them, look, I'm always going to call it as it is. I call the balls and strikes. I'm not going to claim any injury or findings that don't exist. And I never heard from them again. But what that told me is that the money is distributed all throughout our system, including
Yeah.
healthcare providers who are willing to make those compromises. And so when you get into a courtroom, it's very often hard to find anybody telling the truth.
That's so true. And even though they have a mechanism in place where you could get what's called an IMO,
Right.
Dr. Fleming, independent medical exam, where the injured party can be reviewed, their findings are never given the same weight because they're not the quote unquote treating doctor.
Right.
Oftentimes, they render the opinions based upon medical reports and MRIs without ever actually seeing the patient. So they don't really carry the same weight in court. It's just very difficult to overcome that. You know,
Right.
when you have a lawyer, a doctor, and a claimant all saying the same thing. But that is a huge problem
They all,
in our state.
it is, and they all have a lot of money to make
Yeah.
when it comes to being invested in the outcome of that jury or that trial.
Or the settlement of the case. Yeah,
Exactly.
settlement case. Let's switch gears for a second, Dr. Fleming, chomping at the bit to talk about the U.S. Senate, your U.S. Senate race. I know that you are getting tremendous feedback across the state.
Yeah.
And God knows we have to replace Bill Cassidy. I'm not sure he's doing himself any favors here lately. I know a couple of new people have gotten in the race. You may not be aware of it. Not really. I don't really know who they are. Sammy Wyatt is one, and then Randall Arrington is now in the race. How are things looking on your end, though?
Well, I announced 4 months ago, December 4th, that I was running. And our campaign has gone very, very well. I have 3 polls that show that if the race were today, I would win against Bill Cassidy by a comfortable margin. And of course, everyone knows it's no secret that Bill Cassidy, among other things, voted to convict President Trump
Yeah.
in the second impeachment trial. And when asked, and we have it on video, he says because he's guilty. Well, there was never any evidence that the president was guilty of anything referring to January 6th, where the riots occurred. What we do know, however, is that President Trump met with General Milley, who was head of Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mayor Bowser of D.C., and Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. And he told them that they needed 10,000 National Guard troops, but by law, they would have to request those troops. He could not do it unilaterally. And they said, no, thank you. Bad optics. We don't want a bunch of troops around the Capitol. Well, we already had a National Guardsman around the White House. I ought to know because I had to go through checkpoints every morning. It took me 30 minutes to get to the White House because I was Trump's deputy chief of staff for that final year when that occurred. And we had 3 perimeter fences. So, and that was because of the riots that occurred before, BLM and all that kind of stuff. So, so it was really a dumb move. And personally, I believe, I can't prove it, I think they were setting the president up. They knew and he knew that it was going to be a nasty confrontational day.
Yeah.
And I think they wanted it to be a mar on his record so they could then go on and have a trial, which they did. And we had 7 Republican senators who voted to convict Trump. Thank goodness they didn't meet the 2/3 majority required. Had they done that, and had Bill Cassidy been successful in his vote, that would have foreclosed the ability for Trump to have run for reelection, and we would have Biden or Harris today as our president. And so I think that that's an unfortunate thing that Bill Cassidy will have to live with for the rest of his life. And the people of Louisiana want to replace him because they're holding him accountable for making a very bad decision. And he didn't just stop there. He called for him to resign from the campaign even after he had announced. I mean, he spoke very badly about him through much of the campaign. Of course, now that Trump's in office, he wants to make up with him, and I don't blame him for that. But the polls show that people have not forgiven him for things that really could have harmed our country. And with regard to the 2 folks you were referring to, Arrington has run in other races has not raised money or been considered a major candidate. And that's basically the same case with Sammy Wyatt. So I'm not too concerned about them. There were others that were rumored who decided not to go forward. One is Clay Higgins, congressman from the Lafayette area. He announced that he is not running, and no other I would consider first tier candidate has emerged. A couple of them that have been rumored that are holding office today never registered more than 6% in the polls that were run. So really, at this point, we're well down the road. We have over 1,000 yard signs out. I'm going to report over 2.2 million in my campaign account at the end of the first quarter. And as I say, we have 3 polls that say that I would win today. So I'm leading in the polls. So I'm saying everything is going great guns, and we'll just have to see. There'll be others. There'll be, also Rand's gadflies and others to get in the race. We don't know yet about any, what I would consider first tier, strong, high profile candidates. There may be more of those, but we're just going to run our campaign like we always do. And that is like we're behind and work hard every day.
Yeah.
Well, we'll certainly want to keep tabs on that. Do you have any, I don't know, can we expect that maybe you would be getting an endorsement from President Trump anytime soon?
Well, he endorsed me in my treasurer's campaign. And I think that, and again, I've not had this conversation with him, and I'm only projecting what I think is probably in his mind. I don't think he wants to get involved too early because he's got too many important bills that he needs passed, and he needs every vote in both the House and the Senate.
Makes sense.
So, I think he may think, and I would probably agree with him, it'd be unwise to weigh in on this race against Cassidy, who he needs his vote on this upcoming reconciliation package and other things that he wants done. And to be honest with you, my attitude about this is I want to earn his endorsement. Some people would love to just get it right off the bat, and then they can be a lazy politician, a lazy candidate. But that's not my attitude. I'm working hard as I always do, and I want to earn his support and be the leading candidate to begin with, which would make it an easy decision for him, because he has gotten behind candidates who have lost, and he doesn't like losing.
Yeah.
And so it makes a lot of sense that he probably is not going to get involved early here. He might get involved next year, perhaps, and that's just fine with me.
Yeah. Well, one individual that we're 100% confident he won't be endorsing is Bill Cassidy. I'm sure of that. And hopefully, Bill Cassidy will be ruminating upon his betrayal of President Trump in retirement sometime next year. God willing. And it sounds to me like you are doing everything that you can do to make sure that happens. So God bless you for that. Before we let you go, Dr. Fleming, I want to make a couple of announcements here. We have Ryan Mata, who's J.J. Carroll's documentary partner. J.J. Carroll has done probably more than anybody in the world, certainly in the country, to expose this commercialization of child sex trafficking across our borders and just the horrific damage that has done to so many children, a situation that begs for justice. Ryan Mata will be on Tuesday at 10 to discuss that, and Representative Julie Emerson will be on Thursday at 2 to discuss legislation, at 10 to discuss legislation upcoming, and we encourage everyone to go to the LACAG call to action. We're going to have many calls to action this session, both pushing and supporting and opposing certain items of legislation. So make sure you go to our call to action, lacag.org. Dr. Fleming, before you go, how can people follow your Senate campaign and support it?
They can go to my website, which is FlemingSenateCampaign.com, Fleming is with one M, FlemingSenate.com, all one word. You can learn more about me and the campaign. And then you can also, there's a donate button. You can hit that, or you can either mail a check or you can donate online. So that's really the beginning of it all. And also, I have a Facebook page that you may want to go to, and it's under the name Fleming for Louisiana. And there you can follow many of the things we're doing. There's plenty there that kind of talks about the things that Bill Cassidy has done as what we would call a rhino Republican that's more in sync with Democrats in Washington rather than Republicans. If you want to learn more about why you may want to replace Bill Cassidy, it's all there as well. So those are kind of the two touch points, and I'm happy to meet with folks. I'm meeting with groups all over the state, some which are, of course, Republican groups, but some of them are Rotary Club and Kiwanis and non-political groups. So I'm happy to meet with anyone and talk about what my plans are for the future.
Yeah, well, you've certainly been very generous with your time with us here at the State of Freedom. For many people, Dr. Fleming, it comes down to 9 words on Bill Cassidy. I voted to convict President Trump because he's guilty. Knowing nothing else besides that, that's going to be the death knell for Bill Cassidy, hopefully. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us today. By the way, our good friend Ted Hicks
Yes.
asked me to tell you hello and that you're doing a great job.
Thank you. Tell him hello back again, and thank you, Chris and Ted and your group for your help. Through the early stages of this campaign. I very much appreciate that.
Godspeed, sir.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right.